Feminism abuses transgender males emotionally. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I am here to talk to you today about transgender males and feminism. This is a topic that has long intrigued me because, from my experience, most transgender males have primarily feminist friend groups, certainly prior to transitioning. That said, wouldn't it be kind of awkward to be seen as female by one's friend group and then transitioning into being male, thereby potentially being demonized and attacked for male privilege, toxic masculinity, and various other things feminists attack men for? I imagine that it would be. However, since I'm just a cis gay male, I figured I would enlist help from my friend and fellow YouTube personality, Matthew C. Why don't you introduce yourself, Matthew?
Hey guys, I'm Matthew and I'm 17. I've known I was trans since I was around 11 or 12, but I didn't start transitioning until I was 16. I'm currently around 5 months on testosterone. I have a YouTube channel where I mostly criticize SJWs, particularly transgenders, but I consider myself a skeptic and will debunk any sort of bad idea.
When I was growing up in the 90s and I was your age, after coming out as gay at age 14, it was actually kind of difficult for me to find a steady social group. On the one hand, it was a huge relief that there were other LGBT students at my school because I went to a small alternative high school in an extremely liberal area. However, in a lot of ways, I didn't have a whole lot in common with the other LGBT students, as most of them were lesbians who were really into female folk singers, or gay guys who were into pop divas. I was more interested in obscure electronic music, video games, and science fiction and fantasy. What are you into, Matthew?
I'm really geeky. I love math and science in my studies at school. I'm also a chess player and I love watching sci-fi and action movies. I'm also a pretty big fan of Rage Against the Machine.
I think it's funny that you're into Rage Against the Machine because they were a 90s band that was super popular when I was in school. I was never a huge fan of them just because I was never really into really hard rock music mostly, but maybe also because they were a total straight guy band back in the peak of their popularity. Feminists, lesbians, and gay guys basically unanimously weren't into Rage Against the Machine, to the point where if you talked about being into that band, people might have actually been rude to you. Are your friends into the band?
No, my friends are more into contemporary hip-hop and pop music.
Anyhow, I've heard a number of stories from you about the Gay Straight Alliance or the LGBTQ club at your school, or your feminist teacher who is kind of a social justice warrior or whatever, because all social justice warriors are feminists, of course. So, yeah, it sounds hard. Before you came out as trans, did you define as being queer? Did you define as a feminist even?
I did embarrassingly try to convince myself I was a lesbian for a very short amount of time, but that was because I didn't really want to be trans, and I was trying to do everything in my power to convince myself I wasn't trans. I did identify as a feminist before I realized what the feminist and SJW movement was doing, but that's because I thought, like almost every feminist who doesn't know anything about feminism, that feminism was about equality, and that women had fewer rights than men for some reason. However, when I learn about the feminist movement nowadays only infantilizes women, spews hateful rhetoric towards men, and only distracts from any real issues, I quickly stopped identifying as a feminist. When I started finding out about the various men's rights issues which society almost completely ignores and dismisses, I was shocked and disgusted. Though I identify as an egalitarian now because I care about men's rights issues and women's reproductive rights in the West, as well as the rights of women in countries where they are actually oppressed, I am particularly passionate about men's rights issues in the West, simply because they are so messed up and so ignored and often laughed at by otherwise normal people. The worst part of it all is that because I'm against contemporary feminism and social justice, many of the people I know now think that I'm some sort of a right-wing bigot, when in fact I'm left-leaning on most issues. It's become sort of a witch hunt now. Everyone who doesn't agree with social justice is a racist, Trump-supporting fascist, when in fact that's usually not the case at all. My political views are mostly that of what the mainstream left before SJWs took over were, and I really wish that the contemporary left will return to that soon.
Do you feel that feminism is somewhat emotionally abusive towards trans men? I hate to use the word abusive because it sounds kind of whiny, but I feel that an entire ideology based around demonizing basically every masculine trait in favor of feminine traits is bound to be really hard on somebody that is trying to go from being perceived as female into being perceived as male.
Yes, I think feminism is definitely abusive towards trans men. There are so many trans men on YouTube and otherwise online, and even one I know in real life, who do the oddest things in a desperate attempt to appeal to the SJW and feminist crowd. They will sabotage their own efforts to transition in multiple ways. They will often sometimes put on feminine makeup and even wear dresses or other feminine clothing and claim to be doing it as a joke, but it's still so weird that they claim to show no discomfort while doing this. There's also this really, really weird push in the trans guy internet community to be proud of having female genitalia and to not seek sex reassignment surgery for this reason. One of the most well-known trans men who is prominent in the SJW community is Buck Angel, who made his whole career out of starring in porn films in which he had sex with his female genitalia, and the worst part of it all is that he's encouraged other trans guys to also be proud of having female genitalia, one of the things that would cause trans guys dysphoria in the first place. And it gets even weirder. Multiple trans guys on YouTube, and I'm not going to name any names, but some of you guys may know about some of the people I'm talking about, want both a penis and a vagina, and act like this is something completely normal. Even though the vast majority of doctors won't perform surgery that will allow a trans guy to have both a penis and a vagina, because it will significantly decrease the already high complication rate and isn't part of the medically accepted standards for treating gender dysphoria, these trans guys still go around parading their surgery choices to the world. I get that it's their personal decisions and I shouldn't be judging them too harshly because of it, but to be honest, it's really creepy and weird. Considering the first female-to-male sex reassignment surgery was performed in 1946, and that the techniques have been progressing ever since then, this whole being proud of having female genitalia even though you're transitioning to male thing is a very new development in the trans community. And it's definitely stemmed from modern feminism and social justice ideologies. And to make things even worse, a lot of trans men who've genuinely been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and are transitioning don't even identify as men anymore, and often have to make up more identities in an effort to show how oppressed they are. For example, the guy I know in real life, who's a really nice guy by the way, I'm not trying to hate on him, identifies as trans masculine because he says that he only feels male most of the time, and also identifies as intersex, even though he doesn't have any intersex conditions. Rather, he just has polycystic ovarian syndrome, and thinks that makes him intersex for some reason. Not surprisingly, he's an avid feminist who goes to Free the Nipple rallies and hopes to work in the diversity department of a major company when he's older. I don't think all these behaviors that have recently popped up in the trans guy community are really originally all of the trans guy's own volition. It seems like an effort on the part of feminists to almost literally emasculate trans guys so they don't have to become the evil men that feminists are so afraid of these days. I don't think these pressures that feminists are exerting on the trans community could be described as anything other than abusive.
I am guessing that as more and more trans guys begin to pass as cisgender men, more and more trans guys will turn away from feminism. Do you think that there's going to be more and more trans guys speaking out against feminism?
I think there will eventually be a rise of more trans guys speaking out against feminism and social justice. There already are a few YouTubers out there, York, Arnold Johnson, Call Me Laddie, not to toot my own horn too much, but myself, and I'm sure there's more out there. There are also a plethora of trans guys who subscribe to my channel and tell me that they agree with my opinions and are vehemently against feminism and social justice. However, having the sort of opinions that I and other YouTubers I mentioned do is far from the mainstream in the trans male community. In fact, it's often looked down upon. But as more and more trans guys try to resist the mounting pressures coming from feminists and SJWs, I think it hopefully will become more mainstream to speak out against feminism and social justice ideology.
It was wonderful to hear your thoughts on this, Matthew, and I hope the rest of high school goes great for you and that someday we can live in a world where you aren't being attacked from both sides by both straight people who think that you are weird for being trans, and then on the other side, feminists who hate you for being a gender traitor or whatever. I encourage people to check out Matthew C's channel, and why don't you leave us with some parting words, Matthew?
So the last thing I'd like to say is that being transgender doesn't have to be an identity, and it doesn't have to be tied to any sort of ideology. It is nothing but a medical condition at its core. There are so many more elements to a person than being trans. The only reason I'm even open about being trans is because I've witnessed firsthand the damage caused by SJWs to the trans community, particularly trans guys. So bye guys, and I really appreciate it if you checked out my channel.